Hello and welcome to part 3 of the commentary for High Performance Imports V5. I'm going to step back from the commentary just for a second and say that I think personally that V5 was certainly the best video that I'd done so far in the series. And out of the whole 10, I would say that V5, V8, and for different reasons V10 are probably the three best videos that I produced. Bearing in mind this is what was possible back in the day, doing something entirely by yourself with mini DV cams. uh, this particular section, which was a feature on Veilside, I was particularly proud of at the time. And when I came back to Veilside a year later, I showed Yokomako-san this video, and he really liked it. And as a result, he actually offered me a free body kit for my R34 GTT that was the project car at High Performance Imports at the time. And embarrassingly enough, I said no, thank you. uh, I had a couple of reasons for this. One was that the whole concept of that car was that it was meant to look like a normal street car and be a bit of a sleeper, if you like. Um, Another reason is that I really didn't like the Veilside body kit for the R34 GTT. I didn't tell him that at the time, but I hope he wasn't too offended by that because I do have a lot of respect for him and all of his achievements at that time. Um, Interestingly, back then, Veilside, or certainly Yokomako-san, saw Veilside as much a tuning company as it was a body kit company. Whereas, as far as I can tell now, it's basically a body kit company, but that's just the way things went. Anyway, here we go with my extensive tour of Veilside.
Veilside is one of Japan's tuning elite. Their showroom is the most expensive we've seen in Japan, featuring many of the body kits that have made them famous around the world. This Supra is one example, with their unusual buttress-style hatch and dramatic rear styling. More recently, they have completely changed the character of the Toyota MRS. Almost every panel has been changed, with a bolt-on turbo kit and racing seats to complete the package.
Wasn't the MRS a flop? It's amazing how Toyota managed to go from the SW20, which was very popular, especially in Japan, and was a turbocharged 3S GTE with manual transmission. It then came out with the MRS, which, apart from the fact that that says Mrs. in English, was just a really soft car. I think they aimed it at a completely different audience than the previous MR2, and obviously it was soft top only. And the one that we got in Australia was automatic only, and it was a kind of rubbish automatic manual where it was automatic, but you had to shift the gear ratios yourself. It was completely pointless and hardly sold at all here. You'd be lucky to see one in a year. And I don't think it did any better in any other markets. The one good thing about it, though, is it's become the base car for a lot of rebodies. And obviously, the one that Veilside did was pretty impressive. It looked amazingly cool. Uh, but there's also a company in Japan right now that's making a Lamborghini Miura replica using an MRS chassis, and it looks amazingly good too. MRS chassis just happens to really suit the proportions of a Miura, and I suppose you could put a 3S GT turbo in there if you wanted to. I hope that I don't get into trouble for the background music. That was just what was playing in the showroom at the time. If I do, then I'll have to redo this video and cover over that music. Seems like a waste of time, doesn't it?
Veilside also cater to European brands such as BMW, Porsche and Ferrari, but their most extreme cars are always Japanese. The Veilside Evolution Lancer has gained almost 4 inches on each side, with intricately shaped side skirts and massive wheel arch flares.
I had a set of those Veilside wheels on my first Aristo that I owned. I must say they look really cool on that car.
The rear wing and front spoiler are also about as big as they come.
Is it just me, or does it look like a Stormtrooper?
The original 4G63 engine uses a HKS 3037S turbo to produce 530 horsepower. Most famous of all is their R34 Skyline. Though it says street drag, the main focus of this car is high speed. In New Zealand, it took the world record for a public road, exceeding 340 kilometres per hour.
If you've never heard that story, it's worth looking up. There's a road in the countryside in New Zealand that is very, very straight. Not particularly smooth, though, unfortunately. And as I understand it, Option Magazine organised to bring this car to try and set a land speed record for a public road. And if I recall correctly, they did actually get that record at the time, which I think was 343 kilometres per hour. And it was with this car being driven, I believe, by Daijuro from Option Magazine. It was really dangerous. I think it was a bit wet at the time, which is not surprising. And despite the danger, they went ahead and managed to record the time. But, you know, it was a different time back then.
The styling is fairly extreme, especially the front end, with its extended nose cone. The engine is still a 2.6, but it produces an incredible 1400 horsepower, thanks partly to the Veilside 3540 turbos. These are similar to the HKS 3240, but with larger compressor and turbine wheels.
I'm not sure what the situation was there, but Veilside had 3540 turbos, which they put their own brand on before Garrett came out with 3540 turbos, and HKS for that matter. I don't know whether or not they just got them from Garrett slightly earlier than HKS did, or what the situation was. But that did allow them to make 1400 horsepower, whereas 1200 seemed to be the limit before then with the available turbos.
The doors are moulded fiberglass, while the dash is all carbon fibre. The name Veilside is actually a literal translation of the president's family name, Yokomaku.
Yeah, so I'll explain that a bit better. Yokomaku means, well, one potential translation is side veil, because Yoko is side and Maku is veil. And there was, I don't know whether he got it from Bridgestone or not, but I'm told that the founder of Bridgestone was Ishibashi, and that was like stone bridge, and they just reversed it to make Bridgestone. So he used a similar idea to reverse side and veil to make it Veilside. At least that's how it was explained to me at one point. イメージはちょっとエアロパーツの会社のイメージですね。本当は 1% aero parts or more.
あ
I should probably mention that this interview was done at about 4 o'clock in the morning after I'd been to Sendai to film the JDDA Pro Drag meeting, where Veilside tested two of their cars. I got there by train, I think, but I got a lift back with Yokomako-san in his Winnebago at early hours of the morning, and we'd both been to that drunken Hello Kitty bingo barbecue, and he managed to sleep in the back of the Winnebago most of the way down, whereas I sat in the front with the driver. And we rocked up at Veilside, which from memory is about an hour north of Tokyo. And I said, do you still want to do the interview? And he said, yeah, no problem. And he went and got dressed in his beautiful Veilside outfit and came and sat down and did the interview. I was really surprised. But despite the fact that we were both really, really tired, I think it went pretty well.
まあ基本的にはスタートはもうそのチューニングが 100%、そしてまあ93年からエアロパーツ開発し始めてね、やはり一時はまあコンプリート志向、そのレースカーから離れて、もっとそのトータルパフォーマンスに優れたそのやはり走る、曲がる、止まる、またそのデザイン性、そういったものも全てその含めてね開発を進めてきた。そこからお客さんがまあ僕はボディパーツだけ、僕はアルミホイール、僕はチューニングっていうお客さんがねいろいろこう分かれて、ベルサイドのパーツを求めるようになってきたんですね。ですからまあ一時は本当にエアロパーツ 100% みたいなね勢いでボディパーツ皆さんがつけてくれたからチューニングのイメージがちょっとこうね影に隠れてしまったけれども、まあ僕の気持ちの中ではそういうドラッグレースだとかチューニング、まあこういったのは常にまあ自分の中ではまあそうですね、50%、50% ぐらいのね。
I have to thank my Japanese teacher at the time for helping me with the subtitles, the translation of this interview. While I understood enough to do the interview, she did a lot better job of actually translating exactly not only the literal meaning but the intended meaning of what he was saying in the interview.
Some examples of the Veilside engines were on display in the showroom. They also offer their drag suspension as a bolt-on kit, along with aluminium parts like their fuel rails and 100mm throttle bodies. But what about those wild body kit designs?
常に1分の1で車と向かい合って、もう最初の頃は本当にクレー造形といってね、まあ、粘土みたいなもの、見よう見まねでとにかく自分の感性で作りました。
自分の手で。
そうです。もうとにかく頭の中で一瞬で描いたものをこう形にする。
In the Veilside design workshop, we found some new kits under development, like this Nissan Elgrand. The Veilside Ferrari kit is also being further developed. This new kit for the Sora is less extreme than the previous version, but suits the car much better. The original plugs for some of Veilside's recent projects were lined up along one wall, including the new Integra front bar.
And I'll always hang on to plugs at a body kit shop, because if you do break the mold that you've been using, or if it's been used too many times and starts to go a little bit out of shape, you can always make a new mold from the old plug.
エアロパーツ以外に、他のパーツもデザインしますか？
やっぱりアルミホイルであったり、チューニングパーツでもマフラーであったり、日本でマフラーが昔こういうね砲弾型といって円筒状のあのマフラーも一番最初に僕が作ったんですよ。今は
Ento drawer shape actually means bomb shape. If you were into tuning cars back in those days, you remember that most mufflers were sort of a can shape, and then they went to a shape where it was rounded on each end, a bit like a bomb. That's what he's talking about.
もう日本中のマフラーメーカーがもう砲弾型ね作って売ってますけど、今マフラーもうちはティアドロップといってこういう水玉のね、形状、ああいったのもアイディアでしょうけど、あとはこういうアルミホイルなんかもそうですね。
The new teardrop exhaust systems are made entirely from titanium, while the latest 19-inch wheels are machined from aluminium.
あなたのデモカーはだいたいスリップというタイヤが使えないでしょう。なぜですか？
やっぱり私たちのファンっていうかなの期待、やはり自分の車に一番近いパーツ、要はお客さんからすればね、僕たちも使えばやっぱり速くなるんだ、僕たちもこれつけられるんだっていうやはりパーツで組み立てていきたい。だからお客さんにフィードバック一番しやすい、そういうねその車作り、それを常に、やっていきたいな。
That's a good example of a Japanese word that people in Japan think is English. They say feelback. What they really mean is feedback, but for some reason they've come up with the word feelback, and it gets used in Japan all the time. But it's all about getting a response from your customer and finding out how much they like it. So he's talking about using parts that, or developing parts that their customers can easily use, and then tell them if they like them.
お客さんにもこんなに速い車を作りますか？
やっぱり全国からねこういうのを見て同じようにしてください。ただやはりそのオーナーがやはりそのドラッグのそのドライビングテクニックだとか、やはり車をどれだけ知ってるか、ただそのお金払うから作ってくださいっていうのはいいんだけれども、公道乗るにあまりにも危険でね、もう本当にレースオンリーで行くっていうならばもちろん作りますけど、ただやはりなかなかねそのポテンシャルが高い車だと危険ですから。
It's an interesting point, because 20 years ago, cars that made more than 1,000 horsepower were pretty few and far between. But now, theoretically, anybody can buy a Tesla Model S Plaid, which has that sort of performance. Admittedly, it does have a lot more driver aids to try and make it safer, but expecting someone whose last car might have been a Corolla to step into something with over 1,000 horsepower and survive, it's a bit optimistic, I think, even with all of the driver assistance that they have. and certainly expecting someone to suddenly be able to judge how to brake uh, from a very high speed they might not have done before. I find that worrying. So I quite like the point that Yokomako-san made there about actually working out if the customer is equipped to drive the sort of car that they can build for them.
At the workshop we found this wide-body R32 GTR, which belongs to one of the Veilside mechanics. The Evolution 3 body kit isn't an idle threat. The engine setup is the same as the Veilside drag cars, but this one is tuned for 900 horsepower on high-octane pump fuel.
Yeah, high octane pump fuel in Japan was 100 octane RON, which cannot compare to the octane ratings in America, but it does compare to the Australian RON ratings. So it was better than the 98 that we get here. But of course, the drag cars were tuned to run, I believe, on HKS drag fuel, which was well over 110 octane. I think it may have been 114 or 117, something like that. And there's no way really you could make the sort of power that they did back then using pump fuel in this kind of engine. Just impossible. Of course, now you've got E85, which is a whole different thing, and possibly one of these engines tuned on E85 would make even more power than they did back then. But you eventually run into limitations of what the turbos themselves can support.
In the boot, 3 fuel pumps and a surge tank sit beside a massive race fuel tank. The dash seems fairly normal until you see the 6-point cage and Bride driver's seat with an aluminium panel replacing the rear seat.
2年前ニュージーランドに来たでしょ、他の国に行くつもりですか？
今年は韓国にドラッグレースをやりにね、このニュージーランドの 34GTR を持ってきましたけど、この車で韓国この前ドラッグレースやってきました。韓国はまだまだ今レベルがすごく低いですけども勢いがありますんで、これから韓国の人たちもどんどんタイム上がってくると思います。この車でこの前韓国走って優勝しました、ね、韓国のコースレコードもう本当に簡単に出せちゃう。でも来年どうでしょう、もっとタイム上がってね、僕らやはり今日レースで使ったようなああいうポテンシャルの高い車を持ち込まないといけなくなるかもしれない。また本場のアメリカだとか、に今年スカイラインを持ってって、でアウトロークラスっていうのにエントリーします。やはり目指すは一番ですから、ワールドレコードを出して、ね、必ず勝ちたいと思います。
I don't know how he went with that, or whether he even got there. I dare say he did, but I think if he had won that record, I would have heard about it.
R32 ですか？
そうですね。
オーストラリアは
うちのドライバー川崎哲也もね、オーストラリアこの前 HKS の車に乗って、走ってきたけれども、すごくコースもいいし、またそのオーストラリアの人たちの盛り上がり方っていうのがすごく良かった、もうすごいところだっていうふうに言ってましたんでね、僕もちょっと心そそられてね、アメリカ終わったらオーストラリアでちょっと走りたいな、なんかそんな気持ちありますよね。
But he never did come here, unfortunately. I think by the time he might have done that, the focus of Veilside had already shifted quite a bit.
The Veilside Street Drag Supra is the fastest in its class, running a 9.788 on street legal Nitto tyres. Before the JDDA meeting in Sendai, Veilside fitted this huge air scoop, which feeds air to a rear-mounted radiator. Vents in the bumper allow the air to escape. Moving the radiator to the rear makes room for this large duct behind the intercooler, keeping hot air away from the turbos. A laptop is permanently mounted in the car for fine-tuning at the track. The dash is carbon fibre. Stack instruments minimise weight, as do the empty fiberglass doors. The driver is Tetsuya Kawasaki, who also drives the HKS drag cars.
I get the impression that this car was desperately in need of slicks, basically. the, the power output and all of the other technology and development that went into this car, it should have run a lot faster than it did. But because Yokomaku-san insisted on keeping with street legal tyres, it really didn't show what it was capable of. I mean, I've seen cars in the US that ran quite a lot quicker than this with probably less power, but they were running great big drag slicks. So and in a lot of cases, automatic transmission too. So it's very hard to compare what this car did with what a lot of other cars did in other parts of the world.
Later we saw the car's best run of the meet.
I think it went on to run a 9.7 or something like that. But considering the sort of power it had, it never seemed to make the mile per hour you'd expect. But again, that might be partly down to the limited grip. I remember right before that pass, I'd been waiting for them to get ready and come and do another pass. And I thought, oh, cool, I'll just turn on the in-car camera when they're about to do the pass. And then they just turned up out of nowhere and did it. So I didn't have time to turn on the camera. So unfortunately, no in-car on that one. But at least had the other in-car.
More amazing is the R32 Street Drag GTR. This is the fastest GTR in Japan on street legal Nitto 275/40 tyres. The body kit design is quite unusual. The bumper directs air up to feed the whole intercooler, while a side duct feeds cold air up to a diffuser box, giving ample air to the 35/40 turbos. The engine setup is basically identical to the Veilside R34. Once again, the dash is carbon fibre. Those clear pipes are for the HKS air-shifted transmission, while this lever pumps up the transfer case to give the front end more torque. The transmission uses a simple compressed air cylinder, while in the back, 4 fuel pumps feed from a tiny fuel cell.
You can see there he's pumping up the pressure to provide drive to the front wheels, whereas when you're doing the burnout, you don't need any. I dare say the air-shifted transmission in this car would be the same as in the HKS Supra that was in the previous part of this video.
Doing a burnout in 5th gear gets the tyres really hot, but the smoke can be a bit of a problem.
エントリー車両を見てみますと、ほとんどがもちろんでも1000馬力を超えているわけなんですが、皆さん、8秒台の前半とかも出ている方々が多いんですよね。左コース右が走行、スタンディングリップに行きますのが川崎哲也さん。
All Kawasaki needs is to be able to see where he's going. He doesn't care if the cabin's full of smoke.
Reverse is still a manual shift. Once again, we caught the slowest run, but later Veilside broke their own record.
2足から4に入っちゃったんですよ。2から4振られてたんで、自分でパンとシフトアップしたつもりが多分2回押したんだと思うんですよ。なるほど。だから1、2、4。あ、1、2、4。なるほど。
A sensational 8.61 seconds.
Actually lost the race because they're against the Avance R32, but it was on slicks. So again, can't really compare it.
Beating the old time of 8.67.
1400ペース。
そうですね。
じゃあそれは RB26 のリミットですか？
いや、まだ馬力は出せると思います。しかし今、日本で使われているターボチャージャー、今私たちも3540っていうギャレットの旅に使ってます、ツインターボで。まあちょっとこの辺のターボチャージャーのキャパシティ ぱいのところまで来てるんですね。まあもっともその使い方にもよるんですけれども、ドラッグの場合はもうスロットルを抜かずに全開で走っていきますね。しかしゴールしてからアクセルをもう急激にオフにされる、 100% オフにする。ブローフバルブっていうものを、余計なものをやはりつけませんから、どうしてもそういったアクセルのオンオフでもってね、ターボチャージャーの耐久力をすごく詰めてしまう。ですから、最高速なんかだとブーストもかけてある程度こう乗るんですけどね、やっぱりターボチャージャーが持たないんですね。
なんでストロークしないこの車と。
やっぱりね、そのフィーリングっていうかね、やっぱりロングストローク化もいいんですけど、やはりエンジンの特性が変わってしまう。やはりそのエンジンに対してね求めるもの、それはもう本当に僕なりの感性で、レスポンスのいい、そのやはりピーキーな高回転型のエンジンっていうのはもう僕自身がすごく好きなんですね。ですから、トルクを上げて、あまり回転を回さずに、っていうのもこれは一つのチューニングですけれども、もっとエキサイトなね、もう高回転をうんと回していくようなエンジンっていうのはもう僕自身が好きなんで、
ストリートタイヤもそうでしょ。
そうです。
Well, yeah, that was the Veilside expose. I'm sorry I don't know more about what happened to Veilside after this, actually. I did meet up with Yokomaku-san a couple more times, but I stopped doing these videos 2005, I think. So I really didn't keep in touch with any of the workshops that I had formed relationships with before that, unfortunately. But it's very nostalgic for me to look at that. It was quite a big step to be able to do that sort of an interview with a guy like him, and with a company like that. Anyway, that was part 3 of High Performance Imports V5. Hope you enjoyed that. Please subscribe, and I will see you for part 4.